Well, in today's session, we're going to talk about why sometimes tab isn't enough and how rhythmic interpretation is really a critical step to being able to perform a song and play it correctly. And reading music and learning how to decipher that with tab can be a tool that can really take your playing to the next level. So if you don't know how to read rhythm notation, there's a link down below to a course that I highly recommend to get comfortable with it. Today we're going to be talking about quarter notes, eighth notes, whole notes, and half notes. And so if you have no familiarity with those, that link down below will be very helpful. But even if they're pretty new to you, that's okay. This is a pretty beginner way of looking at this. But let's go ahead and talk about learning tabs for a moment. So I love tab. So let me preface this. I think tablature is fantastic and an incredibly important tool to be able to play music well. And the reason I think that is because tablature shows you an exact way to play notes on the ukulele. If you were looking at a piece of sheet music that maybe had like an A note listed, the A above middle C, well, I could play that here, or I could play that here, or I could play that here, or I could play that here. Which one of these four A notes is correct? Well, sheet music doesn't give you that answer. You have to kind of interpret it based on what else is going on in the music. And that can be very challenging. It's a fun challenge. I enjoy doing it, but it makes it very difficult to read music and interpret it on the spot. Tablature removes that problem. Tablature makes it much, much simpler because you'll see 0 on the A written, or 5 on the E written, or 9 on the C written, or 2 on the G written, to tell you that exact version of the A note to play. So in that way, tablature is superior to sheet music in this being very specific to showing you where you should play the notes. What tablature oftentimes lacks, though, is not necessarily what notes to play, but rather when to play them. At what point do I play this note? How long do I let it ring? You know, those concepts are not very well shown in tab, and that's where today's lesson comes into play, is understanding how rhythm and tab interact together to get the correct timing of whatever it is you're playing. So to do this, we're going to work a little bit with a song that's called Ukulele. And there's a tab that's available down linked below. I'll be kind of holding it up on my iPad here as we go too. But this is going to really be a good showcasing of this methodology and this concept so that you can start to apply it to your playing and hopefully find pieces of music and tab that have this sort of shown. So let's go ahead and take a look at this, and let's first just look at the very beginning of the song. It looks something like this. Now, for a moment, just humor me and imagine that the only thing you saw there was the 0, 1, 0, 1. If you saw just that and nothing else, well, how would you play those four notes? You wouldn't know the timing of them. Are they all supposed to be even? Is one supposed to be longer than the other? The answer is not really there. And if we kind of scan ahead and look at like the first two bars, right? So just humor me and pretend those aren't there, right? You see it's 0, 1, 0, 1, 3, 2, 3. Well, if I play those all perfectly evenly and maybe too fast or something, it might sound like this. It's just a collection of notes. It's not really what we're listening to for the song. And the reason is because there's no context rhythmically. I'm just playing random notes as opposed to playing notes in the correct timing. And so this song is a really good example to show this because it's very easy to count this rhythm. Let's look at the first 4 beats. Right here, this first measure, if you look above the notes, this is a C note, and you're playing this on 0 of the C. This C note, being this 0C, is already shown for you, which is great. We love this because it provides the context of, okay, I'm playing the 0 on the C. If you're a low G player, you could also play 5 on the G, but you're not going to because it says 0 on the C. It tells you what note to play. Now, the time to play it, you'll notice that it is the black note with a stem, which means it is a quarter note, which means it is worth 1 beat. And you can actually see above here, we have the number 1 associated with it. And you'll notice that the next beats are going to be 2, 3, and 4, which means all of these 4 notes are going to be the same equal measure, and they're going to be played 1, 2, 3, 4. So when I start creating the sense of tempo, it's very simple because these are quarter notes, which are on each snap. And with this in mind, it's going to sound something like this. It's going to go, hey, that's great. That's the beginning of oral E, right? This is very basic so far. Let's go ahead and look at the next measure, because the next measure gets a little bit more intricate. The next one here is going to be these 3 notes. The first one being another quarter note, which means it's worth that 1 snap, right? But the next note here, the 2 on the C, you'll notice it's going to have that same black note with a stem, but then it has a tie that's going to another note like that. This note right here is what we call an 8th note. And this is where rhythm gets hard. Quarter note's really easy because you just play it on that snap. 8th notes are a little bit more interesting. I really struggled with 8th notes for a long time when I was learning music. But the thing to, make more important is that it is what's called subdivided. And what this means is that it's the measure between the snap that's going to take place. So what we're going to have now is the 1 and then something that takes place in between, which we can use the word and. So we have 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. What you'll notice as I'm doing this is I have the number on the snap and I'm kind of bringing my hand up a little bit to create that sort of and motion. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. With this in mind, what we can do is start to play those 8th notes. And let's go ahead and just try playing an 8th note just on our, 3 on the E string. Let's just try playing 8th notes together. So it should be something like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. You'll notice that this is going to be playing the notes on the in-betweens as well. So with this in mind, this next measure here, if we were to count it, it looks something like this. The first note is on 1, the second note is on 2, but it's an 8th note, so the value is only half of a beat, and then we're going to play another note here on 3 for the and. So it's going to go 1, 2, and, where you're going to be playing on that and. It's a little confusing, right? Remember that the value of this note dictates when the next note is going to be played. That was something I really struggled with music. I'd see this, and I'd see this, and I'd think that this was shorter because this is all very confusing. All that happens is each note is assigned a value, and then you hold it for however that value is. So in this case, we have a single beat here on 3, we have a half of a beat here on 2, and then this 3 is quite a spicy meatball because this 3 is an 8th note tied to a half. What that means is you only play the 3 there, and you'll notice nothing else is played for the rest of the measure. That's because this 3 is going to be held for the 8th note plus a half note. So it's going to be half of a beat plus 2 whole beats, 2.5 beats. It's wild, right? But what this sounds like, if I were to count and play it, would be something like this, where we get this sort of 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. That sound is this sort of syncopated rhythm, and that's what makes this sound so cool. If I were to play them at equal measures, it'd be something like this. And that's not quite the right feel for this song in the situation. So if I play these first 2 measures, it should be something like this. 2 and 3 and 4 and. And if I keep going on, you'll notice that it's going to continue using this sort of concept to correctly play the rhythm. Here on measure 4, the note that's listed is a whole note, which is worth 4 beats. So you're going to play that one. You're going to let it ring for 4 beats. If you were to play that note and only play it for 1 beat or less, it'd be a big problem. You want to make sure that you're correctly getting the amount of time that that note needs to be represented. Now, this might be very confusing, and you might be close to turning off the video because it's like, oh my God, this is so much to do. And this is where my perspective on rhythm is really going to come into play. When I was studying music, I had to learn rhythms exact, and I had to sight read on saxophone and band music, and I had to be exactly right with the timing, and I was really bad at it. Never really connected with me. I tried really hard to get more comfortable with the rhythm, but no matter how much I tried, I struggled in the moment to just read it. And then when I started playing the ukulele, something happened. I realized I didn't need to be able to sight read these rhythms with the ukulele. I don't need to be able to just look at a piece of music and play it like that, because that's not the situation that I'm playing towards with the ukulele. I'm trying to create my own arrangements, play by myself, whatever else. I could have all the time in the world to figure out the rhythms. And once I realized that, rhythm became a lot less scary. You don't need to be able to interpret this rhythm on the spot, unless you're playing with a band or something with your ukulele where you need to, in which case you're probably way above this video anyways. It's totally fine to take your time and methodically work it out with no time limit. It could take you an hour to work out 3 notes. And yeah, it's a long time, but if you do that and you get it comfortable, the next time you see that collection of 3 notes, that rhythm, it's going to be a little bit easier. And that's kind of the story of my career playing is, man, I struggled with timing on things. And as I did it more, I got more comfortable and gradually became better with rhythm. And now I can sight read pretty well on the ukulele, but that's never been the goal. I've never tried to prioritize sight reading because I don't think it's an important skill for most players. For some, it's very important, but if it's important to you, you already know it's important. If you don't, then it's probably not that critical. So with this in mind, let's go ahead and take a look at some other kind of examples of things. So if I were to play a melody of something and play the rhythm completely wrong, it might not sound like the melody at all. So an example of this could be something like this. If I play something like... What was that? Anyone got a guess? Well, it's hard to tell because the rhythm is all wrong. What this is the intro to Star Wars. You can hear once I apply the correct rhythm to the notes, it sounds much better. Now, here's the kicker. Here's where my perspective on rhythm is really going to come into play. I think that learning how to read rhythm using tab like this is a really important step for 2 things. One is when you don't know how a song should sound, you use the rhythm to make sure you're doing the right thing. But if you know what the rhythm is and you can feel it, you can hear it, then I highly recommend don't worry about looking at the music at first. Just try to play it based on that feel, what you might know. If it's a melody you really know well, odds are good that you're able to internalize that rhythm, at least relatively well. And when you're working on the tab, it's okay to try to play to that internalized sound of the rhythm. Then what you do with this, the second step, is check your work. So after you've played the rhythm, look at what you're playing and look at what's listed and see, do these things line up? Is this the same rhythm that I'm playing? Sometimes you're going to be dead on correct, which is really exciting and feels good. Other times you're going to be a little bit wrong, but having that perspective, having played it, can sometimes be a really good thing to see, oh, I was holding that note a little bit too long. It was, it's a quarter note and I was kind of giving it 2 beats. I shouldn't have done that. For me, it's usually, oh, I was holding that note too short. I tend to abbreviate a note, want to go into the next section. It's like, oh, that's a whole note. I got to play it and let it ring for 4 full beats. In fact, on the Star Wars performance I did of that arrangement, which you can find a link down below to that if you're interested in learning it, I had the rhythm wrong when I was playing. I was actually adding extra beats to it, which was sort of funny. And when I made the performance of the video, I sent it to Drew, and Drew was like, hey, you're holding this a little too long, but sounds good. And I was like, oh no, I totally got that wrong. And the reason is because when I first learned the song, I used the rhythm, and then as I was getting more comfortable performing it, I went away from that and I never checked my work again. And sometimes that's okay because it can sound fine. In the case of that Star Wars performance, it still sounded good, but it's an important thing to note. And if I had gone back and checked my work and looked at the music, counted it out and played along with it, I probably would have had a lot more success with what I was working with to be more accurate. So rhythm is a really tricky concept and can be very difficult to, interpret. Now, all this being said, what's really cool is most tab programs now will show rhythms without needing the actual notes to be in play. So if you look at that same ORLE in this, you can actually see that there are stems and things underneath this. You'll notice that this stem is a quarter note stem. You'll notice that these are going to be the eighth notes. This is a half note stem, and the way you know that is it's half the stem of this one, right? And then other times you'll have nothing at all, and that actually means it's a whole note when you have these rhythm markers already listed. So if you're working with somebody who uses a program like Guitar Pro, this is going to kind of be a default setting, which is kind of neat because it will show you those rhythmic markers without necessarily needing to have the entirety of the music written out with it as well. So that's what those are. And that's the last point I want to make with this is ideally, in a perfect world, you can put on a metronome and you can play this exactly. Click, 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 click. Or I made a click sound when I played. That's why you should use a metronome and not just you saying click. But when you're playing this, getting it exactly right. 2, 3, 4. You can hear that rhythm integrity that's there. If I were to play it kind of randomly, it might be like this. That's not the song, is it? Right? And that's because each one of those notes had a different random value assigned to it rather than the value that is shown on the tab. So it's a very confusing concept. And if the only thing you take away from this video is that you can start to read some rhythms and you can start to see, oh, these were eighth notes. I was playing quarter notes. I need to play that a little bit more quickly. That's fantastic because that sets you onto the right track to be able to play music more correctly. Different styles of music will kind of lend themselves more, importance or less importance to these timing elements. If you're playing a solo ukulele arrangement of a ballad, we use this concept called rubato, which is, rhythm sort of lacking tempo. So you're able to hold a note a little bit longer or make one a little bit shorter based on the feel that you have, the feeling that you're trying to emote through your playing. That being said, if you have the rhythm wrong from the get-go, it's still not going to work. And checking your work on the tab with the rhythm is the best way to ensure that you're getting the right sound, more importantly, at the right time. So I'm going to open it up to questions now with this very confusing concept. Zill says, do fancy players learn directly from the regular sheet music or do they still use tabs? This is a fantastic loaded question. So I'm going to go a little bit into detail with this. It depends on the player. That's the most important note. It depends on the player. In my experience and with fellow, ukulele professionals, people that do this for a living, I'm a little bit unusual how I work out arrangements. Most professionals work out arrangements by ear, which still blows my mind. They will hear the notes and usually the timing, and they will know how to correlate that to the sounds that they're wanting to get. That is a skill that is acquired and trained, but it requires a certain level of initial ability. And I didn't have that same initial ability. My kind of ability lied in other ways. And so I never could just hear things and play them in the same way some of my peers could. And heck, even some of my family can. Both my younger brothers have incredible ears, and I just didn't have that same ear. So my obsession with music came with, I want to know how I can acquire this skill. And I never acquired it the same way they did, right? I never just could hear something and play something. But rather what I did is I learned music and music theory and learned, hey, there are ways that you can document these same sounds that they're just hearing. And through that is how I learned music and how I learned playing and arranging and everything else. So for me personally, every arrangement that I do is based on sheet music. It's not based on tab usually because the whole reason I'm doing an arrangement of a song is because there isn't already an arrangement of that song out. So if there was an arrangement of the song, I wouldn't actually, do the song because it's been done. My job is to create new arrangements and new opportunities for people to play. So I have to find sheet music. And to be honest, if I don't find any sheet music of a song, I'm not going to usually do it. So I'll find a piece of sheet music that I can see the melody and the harmonic sequences, and using the training that I've, acquired over now almost decades of practice, I can create arrangements. And I will be looking at the sheet music, I'll be looking at the rhythm, everything else, and decoding it for the ukulele. The rhythm is in some ways the most important thing, but in a lot of other ways, it's the least important for me when it comes to playing the song, because it's harder for me to find the notes, the actual pitches, than it is to figure out how they should be played if I know the song. So when I was working out something like Star Wars, I just had to find these notes, I knew the rhythm because I know Star Wars, grew up with it. So the rhythm became less important for things that I was very familiar with, but it's still critical, as I mentioned before, the mistake I made in the Star Wars arrangement when I performed it, giving something a little bit extra of a duration. And I like the sound of that, truthfully. Like, I do like the error that I made, but yeah, it's crazy. So to answer your question, do fancy players learn directly from regular sheet music, or do they still use tabs? They do not use tabs more often than not. There are some very good players who still, use tabs, but usually they're the ones creating the tabs, right? They're creating the new arrangements. And so it's less do they learn directly from sheet music or versus tabs, and more do they learn from sheet music or by ear. And most of them do it by ear, but there are some of us that do it by sheet music. And the cool thing is, anybody can do it by sheet music. Anybody can acquire that skill, because that skill is just numbers and learning. It's not as audible. And so, yeah, it's fun. I really enjoy doing arrangements. Zill says, going back and checking your work is a good tip. I pay close attention at first, then I move away from the tabs and sometimes get something totally wrong. Me too, as I just mentioned, and everybody really does. And, sometimes it's okay. For me, I'm a solo ukulele instrumentalist, right? So if I'm playing something like an arrangement of Star Wars and I add an extra beat before I restart it, the only reason that would be bad is if the listener thought, hey, that jumped a beat. I don't like how that sounded. I'm not keeping anybody else, I'm not holding accountability in either direction. Nobody is expecting me to play it perfectly in time, or I'm not expecting to be in time with somebody else. So you get a little bit more freedom when you're playing solo. If I were playing Star Wars with a band, I'd need to make sure I'm exactly in time, because if I go out, they're not going to go out too, or maybe they will, and then it's a train wreck, right? So it can be very, very important depending on the context. Connie says, so don't play along with you in the tab viewer for Star Wars. Do you mean you played it rubato, or you actually played a different rhythm that wasn't in notation? So I should have reviewed the Star Wars tab before this live lesson, but I believe what I did, and it showed in the player, is I believe I added an extra beat or two before I start back up. So when it has it goes into I kind of go 2, 3, 4, and I'm going into it when it should be this sort of 2, going right into it, right? So I kind of would let it sit for a moment and then start back over. All right, and so that's where the problem really came to fruition with my playing, was I just kind of end it and be like, okay, now we're gonna restart, when I should have restarted earlier. But if you play along with the notation, play along with the play along part, it will be in time, because the tab has been reflecting that change since I made the mistake. So are there any other questions? I don't see any in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and check the Rock Class forum. As a reminder, if you're watching this as a recording, there's a forum post on Rock Class 101 that is made every time we do one of these live lessons, where you can ask any questions you might have, and I answer them during the session here. It doesn't look like there are any questions this time there, but again, moving forward, feel free to ask at any time in there. We do these live sessions every second Saturday of the month. So Zill says, gosh, I forgot about the Star Wars medley. I should pull that out again. Yeah, that was my favorite thing, and one of the hardest things I ever did on Rock Class 101, for sure. It was super long and super difficult. Don't ask me to play it now, because I couldn't, but man, was it fun. It was truly one of my favorite favorite things to play. And it's a good example of how rhythms can be really important, because with Star Wars, rhythm's very important if you play the main melody wrong, it doesn't matter if you play the right notes. If you play them in the wrong times, nobody's going to know what it is. And that's what, rhythm really boils down to. And that's the thing to consider is tab on its own shows you what notes to play, but it doesn't show you when to play them. The rhythmic notation shows you when to play the notes. And so they're two halves of the same coin to creating a good arrangement, right? You could guess on either one of these. If you know the song really well and you know, oh, this is the next note and it's this sort of rhythm, then the music becomes a little bit less important. But when you're not sure how to play something, instead of just guessing or making something up, that's where this concept comes into play. Read that music, read the notes, look at the tab. It shows you exactly where to play that note. And then look at the rhythm, and it shows you exactly when to play that note. And between those two things, you'll be a really, really fantastic ukulele player. Connie says, that's the only one I still know. It's a great one. The Star Wars medley, that is awesome. That makes me so happy. One of the bummers of doing so many tutorials is I very rarely sit on one for very long, and so it's always fun to revisit them. And the Star Wars one is certainly a fun one. So we'll link it down below for anybody who's watching this as a recording, so that you can check it out and see my mistake rhythmically in the performance and how you can make that same mistake or be a better player than I am and fix it. So are there any other questions? I'll give it just another minute here. As we're going through, again, rhythm is very difficult, and I want to reiterate, it's okay if it takes you a long time to work out basic rhythms. You'll see really proficient musicians be able to just do a rhythm. They can just read it and do it. And it might take you an hour and a half to figure out, oh, it's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and whatever it might be. And that's okay. It's okay for it to take a long time because it's difficult. It took me a long time too. And so hopefully this lesson has helped just a little bit in getting more comfortable with putting all of this together. Well, I don't see any other questions, so I think we're going to call it here. I hope you guys all have a fantastic weekend. If you're watching this as a recording, remember that we do a monthly live lesson every second Saturday of the month at 9 a.m. Pacific time. So if you'd like to check out one of these live and have your question answered, be sure to check out Rock Class 101 down in the link. And the music for today's lesson is available linked below, as well as the Star Wars stuff. We'll link there too. But thank you guys so much. I hope you have a fantastic weekend, and I'll talk to you soon. See you later.